You're listening in on an animated discussion about Batman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire, and today's topic is the Season 1 two-part episode, Two-Face. Man, I am so excited to talk about this, Joshua. We're going to have an extra long episode today because this is a two-parter. And not only is it a two-parter, it's a very special two-parter that gives us one of two very famous Batman villains who get a proper origin story in Batman the Animated Series, one of two, and the second being Mr. Freeze, of course, and Heart of Ice. We're going to get to that with a special guest in a later episode. It's coming. We're really excited to share that with you, too. But today, let's talk about a character who was so gruesome and macabre that he couldn't be done in 66 Batman. And in fact, he was apparently too gruesome for Tim Burton's Batman. But somehow, the animated series, Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, they were able to write him in with, I would say, full guns a-blazing, heart-wrenching storytelling that was just as gruesome as anyone can imagine.
I agree, and we have been building to this moment since literally the first episode. Those of you who remember us being coy about Harvey Dent in On Leather Wings, this is when it pays off.
Yeah, we saw him On Leather Wings. We saw him in Pretty Poison. He's been in a handful of episodes where, hey, he's doing his district attorney thing.
That's right. What do you know? City politics, still kind of a thing in Gotham City.
What do you know? So it's super cool that this was not the first time we met this character. He's a character who's been around for a few episodes, so we have a connection. He's Bruce Wayne's friend. A lot of really cool stuff. But I think before we get too into the weeds about Two-Face himself, we got a title card to talk about first.
Yeah, we have to talk about this title card because if you look at it and know anything about Two-Face, it's very on the nose. But at the same time, it's so perfect, I don't know what else they could have done. In both title cards, for both episodes, the visuals are the same.
Yeah, it's again the light splitting the guy in half with the coin, with the hand with the coin.
Flipping the coin, split between light and dark. One side is very, very bright. One side, the bright side is actually brighter than the light would suggest, and the dark side is actually darker than the shadow would suggest. Harvey brings these things with him. And of course, we're flipping a coin. We will get to that. Although, again, he was flipping a coin the first time we saw him in On Leather Wings, these many episodes ago.
Foreshadowing.
But the thing that I got really excited about is that the music changes between the two title cards.
Okay, I'm glad you noticed this because I didn't. Now, I am going to gush on the music in this, but I didn't notice it in the title card. So what's the deal there?
So in the first one, I would barely call it music. The more I thought about it, trying to figure out how to explain it, I would say it's like a gathering storm because it is like a cymbal or a gong that just goes on the entirety of the title card, punctuated by disparate, separate notes. They don't come together to make any kind of song. It's just like high note, slightly lower, high note, over this low-level crash. Like it just continues the whole time. In the second one, the visuals do not change, and we get what I would consider a more traditional piece of music for BTAS, but with a super mournful, down note feel to it. Because things aren't going well for Harvey.
Yeah, what you know, part 2 is somehow darker than part 1. I've said this once today, and I'll say it again. How the hell did this get on TV as a air quotes family-friendly show? From the get-go, this is crazy dark. The opening dream sequence in both parts.
Yeah.
In the first part, it's Harvey being hunted by Big Bad Harv. In the second part, it's the Bruce. We'll get to that later. But this is
once again we have super dark dream sequences.
Yeah.
Have we ever had a non-dark dream sequence?
Dream sequences in Batman the Animated Series are not good news.
The one in The Forgotten at least ends on an up note. But it is a super serious dream until that, and I think that might be the last happy dream anybody in Batman the Animated Series ever gets to have.
So it's interesting that we actually open with Harvey Dent's dream in the first part. This is a very psychological examination here, but before we get there, I think there's a lot of interesting history to explore here.
Yeah, we have some new characters. We have been putting off talking about Harvey and his history until we could really talk about it here in this episode. But real quick before we get him, this is our introduction to the person who is going to kind of loom large over at least the early couple of 3 seasons of Batman as the mob boss. We get other mob bosses, but this is the mob boss, Rupert Thorne. And he is actually, much like Mayor Hamilton Hill and some other folks, a refugee from early 70s Batman comics.
Go on. I love Rupert Thorne, and actually, he is in the comics, but not like he is in the animated series.
He was very prominent in the late 70s. He shows up in Detective Comics number 469, May 1977. For comic book nerds, you will recognize his creators, Steve Englehart and Walt Simonson. Ooh. No surprise. He is visually modeled after Carol O'Connor, which I would not have guessed on my own, but once I read that, I was like, yep, I see that completely. And originally, he was not a mob boss in the comic book. We're going to talk about a little fan theory I have about why they would choose Rupert Thorne and adapt him, because in the comic book, he was just a very corrupt city councilman and eventually mayoral candidate. But that's it. He's a politician who's connected to all the mob bosses, but is not himself a member of the mob. And he did recur in the comic books incidentally around 2006 and 2007. It's not really that interesting. He was just in some place. He was just there.
They brought it back for some
to
reason.
remind us that that story had happened. I mean, that's a thing you get to do with these really old characters. But so, yeah, basically, Rupert Thorne, corrupt politician, late 70s. You know, that's a good 5 to 7 years after Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams had brought back the kind of darker aspects of Batman stuff.
What's interesting, they use him in the animated series versus Maroni, right? Who that's the guy who in the comics is actually responsible for the creation of Two-Face, right?
You have about 3 really famous names that crop up as mob bosses in Batman lore. One is Carmine Falcone, who kind of runs the whole city.
Of course.
Yeah, Boss Maroni is the one in the comics who was responsible for Two-Face's disfigurement. We'll talk about the third one when we get to a very special Robin two-parter. So we'll just leave him off for now. But yeah, so you have these 3 that kind of come up. But there's a thing these 3 have in common that I think combining them into one character and adapting Rupert Thorne actually answers a problem that was cropping up in the 90s with mobster movies.
Go on.
Well, you're a film guy, right?
Yes.
You know that
so
there
we got Goodfellas. We got Casino. We've got, and this is like the late 80s, early 90s mob film. This is Martin Scorsese hitting kind of what a lot of people would consider, I don't know, Scorsese's great all the time, but I would say definitely hitting a certain renaissance that he's still keeping the momentum up, in my opinion. But anyway, yeah, you've got those iconic early 80s, 90s mob films.
Yeah, we're still quoting Goodfellas.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's happening.
They're all Italian mobsters.
Exactly. You start to get a resurgence of the mob movie where their ethnicity, their Italianness is very important to the narrative, and you get a resurgence of Italian anti-defamation leagues. Groups of people who are like, stop portraying us in media as only mobsters. We do a lot of stuff. We're Italian Americans. Goodfellas was a Warner Brothers picture. Guaranteed Warner Brothers was getting letters on this subject.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't imagine that there was a memo sent down to the Batman the Animated Series offices, but I can imagine that there was kind of a, listen, if we can show mobsters that aren't all Italian, that would be great.
It's a little bit better on the representation. Not all of them are, in fact, mobsters, yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense from a certain wider world historical perspective that at that time you might have somebody saying, can we fold some of these Italian mobsters into one guy who isn't Italian?
Right.
And this group of creators was pretty good about rehabilitating characters we hadn't seen for a while, and Rupert Thorne fits that bill. It's a good adaptation choice.
Right, yeah. I agree. It's a very interesting piece of history there with Rupert Thorne. I also want to talk about Two-Face's history before we get into the episode. This is a character who, again, was considered too gruesome for all these other media. So they immediately ruled him out of Adam West's Batman for obvious reasons.
Oh, it actually begins before that, Caleb. I mean, obviously, anybody who's seen Batman 66 knows he's not going to show up there. But he debuted in the 1940s, and you were only going to see him appear 3 times in the 40s, 2 times in the 50s. So in the span of 20 years, that is a total of 5 appearances, wow. And then he vanishes through the 60s and doesn't appear again until 1971.
Yikes. That's crazy. So even in the comic books, this guy is, we're not sure, he's gruesome.
A little too far.
He is a little too far, which is interesting because obviously he doesn't make an Adam West, but then when we get to the film adaptations, this is Tim Burton's films, Tim Burton wanted to use Two-Face. Tim Burton cast Billy D. Williams, that's right, Landau Calrissian himself, as Harvey Dent, and he's in the first film campaigning to clean up Gotham City.
I was one of those kids in the theater in 1989 that went, oh, that's going to be Two-Face.
Yes.
And then was really disappointed that we never got Two-Face. And the older I get, the more disappointed I get
Yeah.
that we didn't get a Billy D. Williams Two-Face. You do get a little of it in the Batman Lego movie.
You do a little bit.
Just a taste.
You do, just for a minute. I feel really bad because Billy D. Williams took the role of Harvey Dent specifically because he knew that he was going to become Two-Face.
Right.
So here's what happens. They set him up in the first film, and he was going to be in Batman Returns, Billy D. Williams as well. And actually, he was going to be the one who created Catwoman, who is replaced by Max Schreck, played by Christopher Walken. Now, Max Schreck is the big tycoon guy who throws Catwoman out the window, yada yada, and then ends up getting she ends up kissing him with the shocker through his mouth at the end of the movie.
Yes.
It was originally a different version of that, where it was Billy D. Williams, Harvey Dent, and there was going to be a similar incident which was going to create him to become Two-Face for a third film.
This is the first time Max Schreck has ever made a lick of sense to me as a storytelling decision.
Right. I know, right? Isn't it bad? Because
he
same
doesn't
thing.
fit.
He doesn't fit.
He's like sand in the gears, right? Like, he's not a horrible addition, but you do watch this movie and go,
why did we choose this guy?
this is not... Did Christopher Walken just have a writer? How did this happen?
Right.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense.
And I think it would have been a really interesting use of Billy D. Williams as Two-Face. So yeah, I do live in the reality where I'm very sad that we didn't get to see that one. However, Billy D. Williams found out that they were writing it out. He dropped the role, and
who can blame him?
Yeah, I couldn't blame him either. So he dropped out of that one. Now, we do eventually, after the success of Batman the Animated Series, we do get several adaptations of the character. First and foremost, we get Tommy Lee Jones in Joel Schumacher's 1995 Batman Forever, which...
The less said, the better.
I mean, a lot of people give Batman Forever a pass more than Batman and Robin, but the Riddler's fun. Jim Carrey is awesome.
Well, sure, because he's doing Frank Gorshin's Riddler.
Yes,
like
exactly.
That's what he's doing.
Yes.
He's doing somebody else's Riddler, so what do you know? It's good.
It's great. But I can't say I was a big fan of Tommy Lee Jones. And
it winds up being kind of watered down Joker, right?
Yeah,
that's always what I felt.
That's it. He's a watered down Joker with the gimmick of everything split in half, and it just for me it just didn't work.
The visuals were the best part of it,
yeah.
because that dichotomy, that visual aspect of Two-Face, his gimmick is one of the coolest parts of looking at him.
Right.
But none of that trickled into Tommy Lee Jones's performance.
Well, exactly. It was a good visual. It was a visual gimmick that makes sense, but none of the performance or the writing supported that gimmick at all. So it really just kind of fell flat for me. And then eventually we get 2008's The Dark Knight. We get Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face from Chris Nolan. And like, Dark Knight obviously is a very important movie.
Yeah.
I love it. I have some issues with it, but it's great.
It's the peak of the trilogy, too.
Like,
Batman Begins is good, but ramps up into Dark Knight, and then we ramp smooth back out with Dark Knight Rises.
I don't know if I completely agree because, Dark Knight Rises is one thing. Batman Begins is really good. Anyway, another conversation.
I like Batman Begins.
I think that the way they used I was always disappointed by Two-Face in this film, not because I was so glad to see him in it. I was so glad they brought him onto the big screen in a film that was taking him seriously, unlike Batman Forever. He's definitely used to serve the themes of the film and the story that Chris Nolan's interested in telling, and less about writing Two-Face as a villain. They write Harvey Dent really well. They do a great job with the Harvey Dent bit. But he's there. Harvey Dent is there to serve a purpose for the themes that Nolan's trying to articulate. So once he becomes Two-Face, he's like, and I don't care anymore.
Well, he's really just part of Joker's evolving plot at that point, which again is tied very strongly into Nolan's themes. Mm-hmm. And if I have a complaint about the Nolan Batman films, it's that literally everybody suffers because they are being twisted out of shape to do the thing that Nolan wants them to do, rather than how can I tell a great Batman story is I have things to say about urban decay.
Right.
And, that's a larger conversation that Caleb and I can have if patrons really want it.
If you guys
someday,
really want us to debate the Chris Nolan movies, please give the Patreon because I want to make it happen.
I like two of the three movies. And I think this is one of the places you and I can come together, is I've always said that they are great films that are not very good Batman movies, which is to say everybody gets twisted out of shape a little bit to adapt to Chris Nolan. And as good as Eckhart is as this version of Harvey Dent and Two-Face, he's very much an addendum to the Joker stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. And he is used as he's kind of not a footnote because he plays such a pivotal role in making that both the Joker's plans make sense and also kind of the theme of like, what does it look like when you have this heroic figure who is just pitted against the darkest evils, and like, can someone really suffer under that weight? Is it up to one person to be that the inspiration for good, like we've talked about in other episodes?
One of my favorite types of villains is opposite number villains.
Yeah.
And Two-Face makes a great opposite
Yes.
number villain for Batman.
Yes.
So does Joker in a different way.
Right.
But here's this person who is committed to justice, and he breaks bad. You know, Batman breaks good,
breaks
even
bad.
though he's wearing the outfit and going out at night and breaking laws, but he's clearly serving justice, and Two-Face goes the other way.
He goes the other way. And for very, I mean, especially in the context of film, like, you get it. You really get it. And that's why it's important to distinguish what's the difference between Batman and someone like Harvey Dent.
I mean, that's really the bridge between the second and third movie.
And obviously
it
it's
almost
a
feels
setup.
like there's a missing chapter in there where we talk about that.
Yes.
And instead we just get talked to about it.
Right. Okay. Right. And I do want to get off the Dark Knight, but my thing is, I think what Nolan does with his films is he looks at all these characters and says, "What is the interesting idea there? Okay, and how can I tell a story about the idea, not about that character?" Anyway, another conversation for their day. You know what I mean? Like
I need you to write that down because that needs to come back for our Patreon fueled argument about the Chris Nolan movies.
Yeah.
Because I think that might be my Chris Nolan problem with everything now that you put it that way.
So we've gone through all these different versions, but I think it's really important because this version actually paved the way for us to get Tommy Lee Jones and eventually The Dark Knight, and then, of course, other animated adaptations of Two-Face as well. But this is really the one that did it. This is the one, I think, that brought all these origins and different stories together to tell a really impactful, tragic origin story.
Yes, definitely.
So now that we've got all that history out of the way, I think it's really good. We can just kind of jump into the meat of the episode. We're talking about dream sequences early.
Dichotomy, of course, runs through the whole thing.
Oh, yes.
A man at war with himself,
Right.
at war with his ideals, really, which gets literalized a couple of times, not only with the coin, but did you notice at the party where he lost his temper, the one that Bruce Wayne threw for him?
Right.
The Statue of Justice
Yep.
was shattered on the floor.
Shattered on the floor.
And that's the night that he's going to be wounded into the thing that becomes Two-Face. It's so much good stuff.
There's some great things here. I think, and again, it even ties back into those same things from The Dark Knight. Like, what is too much to put on one person? Because Harvey Dent cracks under all this pressure. He wants to win because he wants to do good for the city, and he's shown that he can do good for the city. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the villains know how to hit those pressure points. And here's the kind of double side. I think you get into some really great mental health conversations here because
remarkably progressive in a lot of ways.
It really is, because he refuses to get the help he needs, which at this point he's so under stress that means checking into like some sort of clinic or something. But he won't do that because he knows he'll lose the election if he does that. And you know what? He's right. Like, if someone in the real world, and even in the context of this world, if you had any person running for office who all of a sudden took a 3-day trip to some sort of clinic for whatever reason, for mental health, emotional health, is your faith in that candidate going to be shaken a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely true for 92, 93, 94.
Oh, definitely.
And it's sadly probably still pretty true for now.
Oh, I'd say so.
I mean, it's going to depend. In the 90s, I would have said it does not depend on where you are or what district or whatever you're doing.
Right.
Here, I think there are some places around where you could get away with it, but largely it's still the same problem.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I agree. And I do think that's an area the world's changing and is getting a little better in places, but ultimately at the end of the day, mental health, you're unstable, we can't trust you. So
thank God in this episode,
yes,
Bruce Wayne says the right thing.
He does.
Grace says the right things.
Right.
Like the two most important people in Harvey's life that we know of say the right things, whether it's 1993 or 2017.
Doesn't matter. They say, hey, you need to get help. You're not going to be able to help this city if you can't help yourself first, and we can see you're cracking under pressure. Please take care of yourself. And more importantly, it's okay.
It's okay.
And so think it's like, what is an alternate reality where he does that and he doesn't become Two-Face?
Well, he also doesn't become district attorney for the third time.
That's a good point.
I am not saying those are fair trade-offs. I mean, I'm not even saying those are fair trade-offs in our fictional Gotham City, that somehow losing Harvey Dent as DA would offset the evil that Two-Face does. That's what I'm saying. But I'm saying there's a real consequence. He's not wrong.
Yeah,
if he
is,
checks into that clinic, not only does he disappear at a vital point in his campaign, which would be bad enough, but somebody's going to go, where is he?
Right.
And then somebody's going to find out, and then somebody's going to tell everybody else.
And you know what? It makes you wonder, like, well, maybe Rupert Thorne gets that dirt out either way, because he digs it up.
That's
true.
But
if Harvey Dent, because he's watching Harvey, so if he checks in, well, that dirt's just right there out in the open,
At least it's not a chip that Rupert Thorne tries to use against him.
Right.
Like, it really does change the whole thing. Not necessarily for the better of Gotham City, but definitely for the better of Harvey Dent. And I think that's the place where a lot of difficulties in people taking care of their mental health is where it comes. They feel like they're letting somebody else somewhere down, whether it's loved ones or at the job or public service or whatever it is.
Well, they feel like they're showing weakness, and that by doing that, A, they can't take care of those other people, but B, like, especially if you're a public official, you're a public servant, you want everyone to be able to look at you as this perfect example. When you're in the public eye like that, you are, and I think we've talked about this in a previous episode, you are, to some degree, a lot of pressures on you to look and act a certain way.
Absolutely.
And you need to be a role model. So whenever people see that, like, there's that pressure there. Getting into that idea of white knight, dark knight type thing.
Yeah, definitely. The last thing that I would say on the mental health side, and this is a little bit metatextual, I really appreciate that Bruce Wayne is saying the right things about mental health as Bruce Wayne.
Yes.
The main reason I really appreciate that is because I hate the arguments that Batman is some kind of deranged loner. The text does not support it, or the majority of the text does not support it, and it also makes him a character that's very difficult to root for. At that point, he starts to look a little too much like the Punisher.
Yep.
Which is a character I have most of my life had trouble considering the hero of a story. It's easy to make him a protagonist. It's not easy to make him a hero.
Protagonist and hero are not the same
They're
thing,
not the
guys.
same, and I need Batman to be a hero. So having that textual example of Bruce Wayne actually being very mentally healthy despite, or probably because of, his nightlife, really appreciate it as a Batman fan.
Yeah. Again, and this is talking about the inspirational figure. It comes in a lot of different ways. This is a guy who's being heroic on a little, really basic human level. Hey, man, you're not right in the head. You're not right in the heart. I can see that. Take care of yourself, you know. That's a really important message I think resonates even today.
Tying back to the last time we saw Harvey Dent was Pretty Poison, when Bruce Wayne was very mistrustful of Pamela Isley even before she turned out to be a poisoning femme fatale. I don't think it's for nothing that he's pretty much on Team Grace without ever saying so. He and Grace are united in their care for Harvey in a way that Bruce and Pamela weren't even when she was on the grift.
Right.
I love that.
No, it's brilliant.
Accidental continuity? Probably.
But still,
it's death of the author. It's there for us to read it, and I love it.
I just want to go ahead and give a shout out to this scene where he's hypnotized with the psychiatrist.
Yeah.
This is intense, man. This lady actually feels she's in bona fide danger. Yeah. I think it's just to reinforce the fact that this man, when Big Bad Harv is out, this man is violent. He does not care. And I like it also draws a line. There are two separate personas there. It's not just he's upset. It's there's this other guy that lives in his head.
I think that you actually have a transition scene earlier in the episode that lets you know we're doing. Obviously, there is the dream sequence, but every time we've seen Harvey up till now, he has been either the extremely competent DA or Bruce Wayne's very good friend.
Right.
I really appreciate the line when he first shows up at the raid and he says, "Hey, Jim, how's it going?" And they're interrupted by gunfire and they have to hit the ground. And Jim says, "Could be better." The next time we have anything from Harvey Dent, he is doing a press conference and loses his temper to the point that he is about to beat someone to death on camera.
And someone even says, "You weren't even yourself. You know, you weren't the same person."
And it's at that point that I think we're done with the Harvey Dent that we have had appear in Pretty Poison or On Leather Wings, and we are now going to talk about the Harvey that becomes Two-Face. That's the moment. Because we haven't really seen that from him before, and before he spoke before that, it was a joke, and a good one, that actually made me laugh out loud a little bit.
Right.
So, yeah, it's two guys.
Definitely two guys, and I think that's a very important distinction to draw before we get Two-Face. His brain is compartmentalized. He's got the one we see all the time who's in control almost all the time, but then you've got this deep down, you've got this other part. And I mean, if you really, I'm no psychiatrist, and I would love to talk to a psychiatrist about this, because eventually once we have the accent, that's when they kind of collide into one and create an entirely new person. And eventually in Batman, the animated series, you see him develop a fourth persona way down the line.
Yeah,
way down the line.
But the other way that they reinforce that there are two personas and that Big Bad Harv is particularly dangerous is in the scene where Rupert Thorne is confronting him with his file.
That scene was fantastic because
so good.
This is what happens when you get what you wish for type of thing. Be careful what you wish for. It's like, hey, I got this blackmail on you that says you're afraid of Big Bad Harv, and I'm going to tell you about Big Bad Harv. Oh, wait, then Big Bad Harv shows up.
The close-up of the coin toss lets us, the viewer, know exactly what happened.
Oh, man, that's so chilling, isn't it?
We've talked about Mark Hamill having 2 or 3 Joker voices. This is where Richard Mole of Night Court fame, shows us that he is able to do 2 or 3 voices because you actually have Harvey transition into Big Bad Harv pretending to be Harvey, transitioning into Big Bad Harv.
Right.
There's just one problem. He says really deadpan, "You've got the wrong Harvey." And Rupert Thorne looks terrified.
Oh, yeah.
We get it.
It's open Pandora's box. She's like, I've just summoned the awakened the hive or something like
And
that.
then he picks him up and throws him like 20 feet.
Oh, yeah.
You are in a lot of danger right now.
Rupert Thorne's a pretty big dude.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then he just starts beating other guys up. And then, of course, Batman shows up.
Other guys who are like afraid of him, and he's just like, his hands are grasping, and he's hulked over. Like, he's not even there to fight. He is going to grab somebody and choke the life out of them. These men are not going to get a beating. That's what Batman does. These men are going to get murdered with Big Bad Harv's bare hands. It is a whole different shift, and you see it in the people around him and in himself, obviously. And yeah, it's chilling is exactly the right word.
But I really want to establish that we're still in the part 1, because at the end of part 1 is when we get to the point where there's the explosion that creates Harvey Dent, and Batman, who was there to try to save him, feels responsible at the end of it.
Yes,
right.
Yeah. We have some additional guilt for Bruce Wayne, as though he didn't have enough.
Yeah, he didn't have enough because he was present when the accident happened. Now, the last shot of the first part is gruesome. I mean, I know this is animated show, but like the way it's all about the buildup, the tension you have there. You're like, oh, I don't know if I want to see what's coming, and then and then when we finally, the way they frame with the lightning and everything, it's just, you're like, oh man, this guy he's
hideously disfigured.
Thank you.
And it's not just ugly. The reaction of the doctor and the nurse actually reminded me of the back alley doctor's reaction to Jack Nicholson's Joker in Batman 89.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's wasted on the Joker. It's much better for Two-Face.
Oh, definitely.
And to have
scarier.
Two professionals. Like, again, you're reading into this, but these are two people. This is A, what they do every day, and B, they were ready for him. They knew he was disfigured, and both of them still taken aback. Mm-hmm. And then to get Grace, of all things.
Yeah.
In the hallway, you get Grace with the same, and she just passes out.
Right.
When he's revealed by the lightning like some kind of Frankenstein's monster. Mm-hmm. Wow. Do you remember the last 2 words of the episode?
Oh, no. Go for it.
Goodbye, Grace. That's it. Two-Face voice.
Yeah.
Goodbye, Grace.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Now, she's not gone very long.
No.
She's kind of the crux of the second episode.
Right.
But that is just could not be more impactful.
Yeah.
It sets up that crux very well.
Right,
we know what the important part is going to be.
Right. Well, I like that we jump ahead quite a bit. And that's the thing. There's a little bit of ambiguity with how long he's out and about that I actually really appreciate.
They said it, actually.
Do they?
Yeah, I don't mean to actually you, because I didn't notice this until about the 3rd watch. Rupert Thorne says, 6 months of this is too long.
Ooh.
We jump 6 months in the future in between these 2 episodes that aired back to back. Like, it wasn't, we didn't let this simmer. These were basically together. But 6 months passes that he has been slowly dismantling Rupert Thorne's empire, and Grace has been hoping against hope that her Harvey would come back.
I'm glad you clarified that. It's a 6-month time jump, and
it gets one mention. It took me 3 back-to-back watches in prepping for the show to notice it, but I was like, oh my gosh, that is a significant amount of time.
Right. It's really great to see, though. You quickly understand exactly what the consequences of the first episode are within like 2 minutes, though, because you have Rupert Thorne's henchmen saying, "Oh, we created him. We tried to stop him as the DA, and we create our own Frankenstein."
The lovely Candace. She really gets the spotlight shined on her in this episode.
Yeah.
But Candace was in the first episode, and she was great. She's actually the one that gets Harvey's file for Rupert Thorne, his secretary, I guess. But
assistant?
Let's not talk about it. I mean, because it's pretty clear she does a lot of things.
Oh, yes.
We'll just say it like that.
Lots of things.
Because they do a lot of very femme fatale things with her.
Right.
And she's also kind of an adrenaline junkie.
Right.
She really likes being there for the fight between Batman and Harvey and Rupert's guys. Mm-hmm. She really likes it. So, anyway.
It's worth noting,
Candace, we made them. We're responsible for this. Thank you, Candace, with the insight.
Yeah, great insight. I mean, it gets kind of like a quick recap, like, oh yeah, this is what happened in the last part. Because 6 months have passed, we've seen that Two-Face has grown his own operation. He's got his own cronies.
Twins,
of course.
Twin henchmen. One of Two-Face's ongoing best things is his gimmick. There's a psychological aspect, of course, with the duality.
Right.
But he makes it so explicit so easily, with the suit being split down the middle. A lot of times
his headquarters
is split. everything's 222, including these two twin henchmen that he specifically says he put in jail as Harvey Dent.
Right. And also, we can't forget that he loves robbing Rupert Thorne's, all of his organizations that have 2 incorporated in the name. The Two's Cafe, Club 22, the Second National Bank. Apparently Rupert Thorne also has a thing for 2s. Little did we know.
So Alfred makes a joke about that, mentioning something that could not be owned by Rupert Thorne. And that's when Batman gets to fill in that piece for us. No, he's going to step this up because he's run out of Rupert Thorne properties that also have 2 in the title.
Yeah. But no, it's good. It's a good. What this show does really well, and I we'll talk about it in the Heart of Ice episode as well. It takes these gimmicks that should be really silly, but makes them even more impactful. It's cool, but like it's almost it tells you so much more about that character and where they're at emotionally with that Two's gimmick, with the split, getting the twins and robbing the Two's places like that. That all, unlike Batman Forever, I think the text and the writing and the performance does support.
Oh yeah,
does support that gimmick and makes it really just tells you so much about that fractured psyche.
Do you recall the thing he saw that finally made him go to grace?
Well, it's the wedding dress, right?
It's a wedding dress, but did you notice what the banner over the wedding stuff said?
Oh, what was it? Two's Company?
And the 2 shall become 1.
Ooh.
Now look.
That's fantastic.
He's got twin henchmen. He's in the Double Deuce Club. It's split down the middle. It's he steals exactly $2 million, $200 million. I don't remember, but it's got a 2 in it. All that would be, it's ridiculous, and it should be ridiculous.
Right.
But then we go ahead and make it also incredibly emotionally impactful because he has already said no to seeing Grace once.
No, okay, and I want to hit this up.
That one pushes him over the edge.
I almost cried the first time he thinks about Grace, and they're like, "Hey, what about that girlfriend you had? What do you think she would think?" And he's like, he thinks about it, and he flips the coin and says no. It broke my heart. Like, this is the emotional impact here is devastating. This guy who clearly so badly wants to get back to his fiancée and wants to be one. He wants to be healthy. But at the same time, he can't overcome this weird duality and then his obsession with Chance.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the product of, when his 2 personalities became once, Chance became the only thing that makes sense.
It's the tiebreaker between his 2 personalities, essentially. If the coin says good, good. If the coin says bad, we do it bad. And it said no to Grace in that moment. The animation across both of these episodes is particularly good. It's extremely fluid, extremely dynamic. This is kind of a weird thing for me to hang my hat on for this, but look for the scene where Candace is leaning against the wall, listening in on Harvey's psychologist appointment, and then how fluid and real her push off the wall, turn to look over her shoulder, and then run down the hall looks. The animation is amazing in this, up to and including facial expressions. Now, I want to say the one that made me think of this, but then you need to talk to us about noir facial close-ups, Caleb. But the one that you made me think of here is he's angry looking on the side of his face that moves. The Harvey Dent side.
Sweat. There's
When he sees in his wallet the picture of Grace, the Two-Face side, I don't think it can move. It doesn't react, but the Harvey side just drops. And it's not the kind of dramatic close-up that we are going to talk about from the first episode, but it is still very tight on him, and it's like, oh yeah, I feel every bit of this. It's heart-wrenching. But before that, let's talk about these classic film noir facial close-ups, especially from the first episode.
Well, yeah, if you're looking at these, anytime there's the light shedding on one half, it's always there to communicate duality. With noir, it's black and white, so it makes it a lot easier. Now, we're doing this in color, which makes it a little different, but they're still using those same effects. Really big, of course, throughout this entire show, using those black levels to great effect. The sweatiness, like when the characters get nervous and they get those really tight close-ups of them, like the reaction shots. Then they cut back to wide shots. There's a lot of really nice text things that just add texture and good noir feeling to the way that they use the shots.
Yeah, the tight close-up on a worried or angry face that has, to anyone who has been on a movie set, obviously been sprayed with water beforehand.
Oh, yes.
Like they're dripping. That's a thing all the time. And every time we get Harvey break into Big Bad Harv,
he starts sweating.
He starts sweating in the angry face. You also, at the party in the first episode, get a color shift in the background.
Oh, yes.
It red shifts.
Oh, yeah.
And then comes back when he is about to punch Bruce and Grace steps in the way. Immediately he looks shocked and it shifts back to the regular colors.
Right.
So great.
That is definitely something else you're going to see a lot in noir crime films, like the way the backdrop change when there's reactions.
But you don't see it in the second episode.
No.
Because he's always this guy.
Yeah.
There's no shift.
No,
There's no super close up. We're always this guy.
Right. He is now one person, like two personalities living in one person now, as opposed to before where they were two separate. So there's not really any back and forth here. It's just, what's the coin say? Yeah.
That's right.
Nay, you know.
And speaking of the coin, let's not forget Chekhov's box of silver dollars.
Oh my gosh.
That are stolen from Rupert Thorne.
Yeah.
And then used by Batman in the end to derail the Two-Face's plot.
So this is especially tragic because we also have you have to mention that Grace is the one who leads Rupert Thorne directly to Two-Face, which again, just heartbreaking realization for both of them. Like, she goes, there's a beautiful scene, reunion scene, and like it really, I felt like deep. I was like, yeah, they're together, and she's gonna help him get well. Until Rupert Thorne shows up because he put the tracking device there.
And who actually gave her the tracking device? Candace. Candace and Grace are another example of duality going on in this episode. Rupert Thorne is a smart man.
Right.
But Candace is also just as clearly sharpening his intellect on his side.
Very clever. She gets her hand. We see her get her hands dirty quite a bit.
Yeah, she's the crafty one. She goes out and makes the thing happen for Rupert Thorne. Similarly, you have Grace on the other side, who is very representative of Harvey's better half.
Right.
Instantly snaps him back to good Harvey.
Mm-hmm.
And what does Candace do? She exploits that weakness. That craftiness exploits the weakness. And so you have them in that final scene standing next to each other, Candace and Grace. You also have them in a literal fist fight. Well, it's not really a fist fight.
Pretty
it's
close.
Definitely a physical altercation.
Yeah.
There's some hair pulling. Just saying.
It's very close. But yeah, seeing that realization and then that sense of betrayal you get on Two-Face.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's like ultimate betrayal because he made himself vulnerable. He opened himself up after 6 months of not seeing her, and for that brief moment he felt like he was in the right place and he made the right decision until the rug's pulled out from underneath.
She'd uncovered his scars. She'd said, "You never have to hide from me." They were having
beautiful.
a real moment.
Oh,
like
yeah.
It was a real moment. And here's Rupert Thorne. The only thing I was surprised about by Rupert Thorne is he tells Harvey that they tricked Grace.
Right.
I kind of expected him to twist that knife
A little bit
harder.
long, yeah.
But maybe he's got a memory of twisting Harv just a little too far the last time and is like, back up. I just want to read that in there that Rupert Thorne is legitimately terrified of Harvey Dent.
I think he is. And also, I do wonder if that was a way to kind of add insult to injury, though. Like I had bested you. I used your own girlfriend against you. No. See, she had no idea. We were using her as a pawn.
I have corrupted even your better half, Harvey Dent.
Right.
Yeah.
You know.
Maybe.
I don't know. There's definitely something to read into there. But this is a really great, impactful scene. And of course, this is again where Batman shows up. Again, Batman very much playing a supporting character in Two-Face's story. Now, one thing we forgot to mention.
I'm going to say because of this thing we forgot. I think it is a dead heat between Harvey's story and Bruce's story.
I would say part one is Harvey's story.
Yeah, that's fair.
Part two, I do think, though, because to understand Two-Face and understand why he's such an important villain, we do have to understand his impact on Bruce Wayne.
It's true.
Dude, the dream sequence that we overlook between Harvey and Bruce Wayne feeling guilty for letting Harvey get injured and being mentally fractured and creating this Two-Face character is just heartbreaking, terrifying. I mean, that dream sequence is haunting.
And also directly tied
to his parents.
To the failure to his parents.
Yeah.
Which is, again, with the metatext that I really like. I recognize that Bruce Wayne has some survivor's guilt, but it's not the thing that drives him, but it's still in there, right? And I feel like this scene kind of supports that. He couldn't have done anything to save Harvey in that moment. He was just as helpless as Batman in that moment as he was as 8-year-old Bruce Wayne with his parents.
Right.
And yet, tortured psyche connects these things and shows you just how deep his feeling for Harvey is.
Right. He considered him like a brother and a friend.
Absolutely.
And he feel like he let down someone he was closest to. I also think this is a great time to talk about the differences between Two-Face and Batman because both of them are victims of mobsters and kind of talking about that cracked mirror and how Batman and Two-Face differ. You've got, obviously, they're both kind of driven by vengeance to some degree.
Let's say this a little differently.
Yeah.
I would push back and say that they are driven by justice. But they have very different definitions of what that means.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, okay. I'd agree with that. Vengeance versus justice. Then we're getting back to Christopher Nolan again. But anyway.
But I think there has to be a stark black line between those things.
Yes.
And there also has to be a stark black line between Two-Face's idea of justice, which is a version of justice.
Yes.
It's not vengeance, because when we get to Heart of Ice, we will see what
actual vengeance looks like.
Laying Batman's sense of compassionate justice next to someone's discompassionate vengeance.
Right.
We'll see what that looks like.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's a great point. So it's justice, and I think that is, I agree. That is a better way to phrase that. They're both products of tragedy at the hands of the Gotham mob. But the difference is you have Two-Face being very chance-driven with the coin. There's no other way to decide what's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Only chance is the real, true justice. I mean, there's strategy, but not really. Like, it's the way he makes his decisions. There's strategy, but the way he makes his decisions is...
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure. He has a strategy, but it's going to go this way or this way.
Right.
And I don't know until I flip.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus Batman, who is very methodical. He's got a plan. He's got a breakdown. He's got backup plans for his backup plans.
And even when it goes south, he uses the environment to his advantage.
Yes.
We'll talk a little bit more about Chekhov's silver dollars here in a second.
I mean, why not talk about Chekhov's silver dollars? I just think it is interesting when you hold up the mirror between those two characters.
Yeah.
And the best Batman villains, I do think, reflect
Opposite
so
numbers.
much about
Yeah.
Batman himself. I think it's really important. But also, he does exploit Harvey's weakness.
Absolutely.
Two-Face's weakness, his obsession with chance, and he takes the silver dollars in the moment of, I'm going to kill this person, yay or nay, and he just throws a whole box of silver dollars up there, and
which is
fractures. That's
torturous.
That is torturous. That dude's damaged psyche just got like shattered into a million pieces.
Richard Mole sells that almost Wilhelm-style scream because it starts out as anger and I can't find my coin, and then becomes panic, and then just becomes the scream into sobs.
Start crying, yeah.
It's and let me tell you what, I think Bruce is going to beat himself up about that for quite a while.
I kind of wish we could see a follow-up episode again where we see how Batman Bruce Wayne recovers from the specific incidents, because what he did was he had to exploit a weakness, a psychological weakness, which he understands the importance. I mean, we in the last episode talking about the importance of psychology and mental health and emotional health, he exploits that very thing in order to defeat Two-Face.
This is the thing I had to bring up in my superhero university on Batgirl, actually, that in that story, Batgirl more than once beats her villains using their pathology against them. And I said at the time, that's a thing she learned from Batman, and I just cruised right past it. One of my patrons, hi Susie, was like, wait, what the heck do you even mean by that? And I actually used this scene as an example. In the midst of Two-Face using a coin to make a decision, Batman introduces essentially an infinite number of variables in what ought to be a binary choice, and it ruins him. It wrecks Two-Face. Bruce is going to kick himself over this, but I don't think it's going to torture him forever. And I'm going to put words in his mouth kind of to spotlight a line from Two-Face that I really liked.
Okay.
At one point, Two-Face said, the only law that matters is the law of averages.
Right.
And again, to put words in Batman's mouth, this is a compassionate justice. This is actually a justice that's based around saving people. So he's like, no, the only justice that matters, the only law that matters is the law that saves people. And in that moment, he's got to hurt his friend in order to diffuse this moment, in order to turn around and get his friend the help that he needs. We don't see that on screen. We know textually that Harvey Dent is getting the best mental care that money can buy because Bruce Wayne has all the money in the world.
Right, exactly. That's a really good point. It does tell us something more about Batman, that he is willing to exploit weaknesses, especially, I mean, if someone he cares a lot about, too. That he is willing to do that if he thinks long-term that'll serve his idea of justice
Absolutely.
and help his friend.
And I don't, perhaps you disagree, I don't actually see an ethical problem in that moment. I mean, it's not fun. I wouldn't want to be in that decision-making process, but it's a bunch of people are about to get shot to death, or I can throw coins in the air knowing that it's going to hurt this friend of mine.
I don't have ethical problems, but I do think it shows just how far he's willing to go.
Absolutely.
And I don't think everyone would be willing to do that to their friend. But
that's fair. That's fair.
But you're right. Morally, I don't think it's wrong, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it saves more lives, even if they're scum or criminals or whatever.
You know what? I'll tie this back to the advice that Alfred gave him, because Alfred's parental moments in these episodes are great. And Alfred says, be careful. Harvey Dent is not the man that we knew. And Bruce says, I can't stop feeling like my friend is in there somewhere. And Alfred's response is pretty great. He says, that may make him even more dangerous. And I think that's, again, we're reading all kinds of stuff into this thing, but it's a text that can support it. If those words are bouncing around the back of Bruce's mind in that moment. He's like, throw the damn coins.
He's like, I know how I can stop him because I know what his pressure points are.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, though. Again, this is where you get into that really interesting moral ambiguity with Batman. For everyone's got to decide for themselves, how does this work? Because that is exactly the same thing Rupert Thorne did to try to undermine him in part one.
True. Oh my God.
So what I'm saying is him and Batman, for different intent.
Yeah,
the
intent
is
has to matter, but oh my God.
But he exploits the same weakness that Rupert Thorne did to get the mean, to get the ends that he wanted.
You know what? You know what you just did? Okay, Caleb and I had a conversation about the final scene of this episode and how we maybe thought it should have gone a little bit different way. But you know what you just did by pointing out that dichotomy with Rupert Thorne? You changed my mind.
Ooh.
I like the ending of this episode now.
Really?
I do. All right.
So let's get into it.
Okay. The very last scene is Batman over a wishing well saying, wherever there's love, there's hope, but a little luck wouldn't hurt. And he throws a coin into the fountain. And it lands heads up. Before this conversation, we agreed. Caleb, what would we have preferred?
Scar's side up. I really thought this was very uncharacteristically... It's still bittersweet, no matter how you spin it, but it felt more optimistic and hopeful than what I felt had been earned throughout the episode. Especially because he gets... Yes, they stop Two-Face, but also he's going to jail / asylum.
There's a bigger conversation there, right? Because I just said we know Bruce is going to spend all the money in the world on Harvey Dent. I wonder if next time we see him, he's not better.
No.
You and I might be reading knowledge of how serialized stories work into this, because we knew Two-Face was a big villain and that he would not go away.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
would be back.
That's the other thing. That's the other thing. I know this is a self-contained story, but we all know Two-Face is going to come back, and when he comes back the next time, there's no reference to what happened here.
Yeah.
So it's like
the redemption story is over, and it didn't go that way.
It didn't go that way, but it's weird because this ends on a slightly, redemption's going to happen. It's possible, and I agree. That's the beautiful thing about Two-Face is you always want to believe that he is going to get better. So we know how that ends, but also you're right. We also know that later he comes in and is not well, and we don't know what happened.
Probably broke out of Arkham.
Probably,
which is there's a whole conversation to be had about Arkham Asylum that we will save for probably the trial episode, because I think that's probably the most inside of Arkham we get. So I'm going to put a pin in that. But what I will say is that you pointing out that dichotomy between the actions of Batman and Rupert Thorne having a lot of overlap, but being motivated by such completely different intents and desires for an outcome, I think the hopeful ending is less about Harvey Dent and more about Bruce Wayne.
Can you lay that out for me a little more?
We're talking about Bruce Wayne, who hurt his friend partially because of his father figure's advice. He's more dangerous because of your friend being in there. You're more likely to hesitate. You're more likely to not believe he's going to do the horrible thing. And so, Batman hurt his friend to stop his friend, and says, wherever there's love, there's hope. And this is a man for whom that was literally true. Alfred, Leslie Tompkins, who we meet in another episode, these are two parental figures that stepped in for him, and then he gets himself a son and brings him up as a crime fighter also to create this kind of like bubble of love around him, and what do you know? Now there's hope. But he also understands that there is something, there's a kernel of truth to Harvey Dent's Two-Face's really philosophy about the law of averages. And so, but a little luck won't hurt. Man.
Wow.
This episode, you guys. Oof. These episodes.
This is good stuff. Guys, this is done in 1992 for family-friendly television. It's amazing.
In roughly 44 minutes.
In 44 minutes. I would still argue this is the best Two-Face story we've seen on the screen, because none of the films 100%. Do it justice. Yeah. I mean, yes, Two-Face is used in other animated DC direct-to-DVD DC films. Like, he's around, but I don't think any are so complete. And this is why, for me, this is always going to be the definitive Two-Face story. Whenever I think of Two-Face, this is the story I'm going to think of.
Yeah, this is the strongest Two-Face origin.
This has been an extra long conversation for a two-part episode.
Well, it's a two-part episode that needs this kind of look, obviously.
It deserves it. And honestly, even just talking with you about it here today, I'm like, man, this just goes so much deeper.
Yeah, this is a dense text.
This is a very dense text. But if people love this episode and they want to continue to explore those same ideas and themes, do you have any recommendations?
One of the obvious influences on the creation of Harvey Dent as Two-Face is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But I'm actually going to point you specifically at a version of Jekyll and Hyde that looks at what if Two-Face were completely unrepentant on every level. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a fantastic piece of comic book fiction that pulls out all of this Victorian-era dime novel stuff and puts it in one place and then spins it a little bit sideways. And their look at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is based very thoroughly on the original text and then continues past it in a way that's very believable and interesting, and I'm not going to say another word about it. Because you should read League of Extraordinary
You
Gentlemen.
should.
Watching what happens to Jekyll and Hyde as he bounces off of these other Victorian characters is fascinating.
All right, yeah. The only other recommendation I have, and again, this is not a great movie, and in fact, especially today where we're a lot more sensitive about mental and emotional health, I don't think the portrayal of a person who has got split personality disorders necessarily, it's not accurate at all, and maybe it's not doing a service to that particular disease, so I want to put all those caveats there. But a movie that you peel away all of the real-world implications and say, hey, I want to explore a story about someone who has split personalities, that's a fun watch. And there's enough weight there and enough ideas raised that I think it's worth considering is the film Identity. It stars Ray Liotta. John Cusack, Ray Liotta, Amanda Peet, Alfred Molina.
Great cast.
It's a great cast. It's directed by James Mangold. So if you watched Logan The Wolverine, same director. Just a really insightful look into, okay, if we were to take these multiple personalities and write a fictional story about a person and get inside their head, how would that play out? I think it's actually a good watch. That's enjoyable, but also challenges the way you perceive these diseases. Obviously, again, this is not, this is how it actually plays out, but hopefully give you a little more consideration to what is the psychology of someone who has split personality disorders.
I'm adding it to my to-do list.
Well, that about wraps up this animated discussion. Caleb, where can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Well, you can always find me on Twitter talking about film, television, and all manner of other sorts of pop culture goodness at C Masters Talk. On Twitter, again, that's at letter C Masters Talk. I'm also the editor-in-chief at a film website that specializes in in-depth critique and analysis of film, thecinematropolis.com. And we publish essays on all types of films, good comic book movies, all that good stuff, including some thoughts from my co-host Joshua here. And you can find all of those at thecinematropolis.com. Joshua, what about you?
I'm also most active on Twitter, where you can find me easily enough, at Joshua Unruh. I'm happy to field any superhero questions you might have, and who knows, it might even become a podcast unto itself. I'll also keep you in the loop on any fiction, articles, podcasts, or diatribes I cast out into the world, including my work at the Cinematropolis, and for Pulp Diction Productions and Press.
Join us next time for It's Never Too Late, where we find out exactly how late Batman is to a very important date. So that's going to be episode 12 of the first season of Batman the Animated Series.
Until next time, we'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel. Animated Discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. And if you can't support us financially, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It's the best way to help others discover the show. Keep up with Pulp Diction news by following at Joshua Unruh on Twitter, or find us at facebook.com/pulpdictionproductions. And a special thanks to Vinnie Hogan for our original theme music.